It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast. Today is part 2 of Stinkin Thinkin, or as Ben calls it,
cognitive distortions.
No, we'll get to that. That's perfect. We'll get right to that conversation after this important message from Faulkner University. This episode of the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast is presented by Faulkner University. Faulkner University is a private Christian liberal arts university based in Montgomery, Alabama, with a mission to provide an education anchored by not only intellect, but also character and service. The Faulkner experience aims to educate the whole person. Every individual matters every day. We all want to become better versions of ourselves. No one wants to remain trapped where they are because of missed opportunities and unrealized dreams. At Faulkner University, we believe your dreams don't have an expiration date. We understand that you're looking for more than a degree. You want to find your niche and thrive in your career. Whether you're a high school senior just beginning your trek or an adult student looking for a better path, Faulkner is here to help guide your journey. Go to faulkner.edu to apply or get more info. That's faulkner.edu. I'm Travis Creasy, that's All-Pro Counselor with 3-Chord Counseling in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and pulpit minister at the Highland Park Church of Christ there in Muscle Shoals. Also with us today is Will the Thrill Mahan, who's the youth minister at Highland Park Church of Christ there in Muscle Shoals. How you fellas doing?
Muy bueno. I'm doing great.
That's
Will, how you?
Sorry.
I'm doing good. It made me think when you announced Ben as the pulpit minister and me as the youth minister, I was like, God bless the people of, Highland Park. Like, not in like that God bless them because of us, but like,
bless their hearts kind of thing.
Richest blessings be upon them for having to deal with us.
Most important thing is they know what you meant. And, that is so true.
Sounds like negative self-talk, Will.
There you go. We put that on full display here on this podcast right here.
Can it be negative? Can it be negative self-talk if it's true?
It's just realistic. Yeah, it's just what it is. It's just realistic. So.
In the realm of possibility. Well, as mentioned, we continue our discussion. We got 5 more of the Stinkin Thinkin cognitive distortion. I got it. Boom. Today. And so we'll start that. Will, kick us off, bro.
Yeah, so the first one is called over-generalising. Everything is always rubbish. Nothing good ever happens to me. People are seeing a pattern based upon a single event or being overly broad in the conclusions that they draw.
So the idea of just generally seeing everything as the same. I messed up one time, so I'm always going to mess up. I failed this one time, so I'm never going to get it right. This job didn't want to hire me, so nobody's ever going to want to hire me, And so going into this idea of just it's all one event becomes almost every event. That girl didn't want to date me, so nobody's ever going to want to date me. So a lot of times people fall into that category of just it's. I talk a lot about all of these being sort of a mental spiral. When I hear or think something and then I just start spiraling downward. It's like something bad happened. Oh no, everything bad is going to happen. And so it sort of becomes bigger than it has to be. So how many times have we said, well, even you go back to David, the passage that a lot of people struggle with in the book of Psalms, I think it's Psalm 51, in sin, I was conceived, or, my mother conceived me. And some people think that means, original sin. And that's not what David's saying. David is basically saying, I've never done anything right in my life. How many times have we thought those same kinds of things? I've never made a good choice. Every time I choose something, it goes badly. And so we start that thought process, and then we start questioning all of our choices, and then we never know what kind of spiral that's going to end in.
Well, I struggle with this big time, and it may be silly, but watching sports, like, I just assume the worst, like, because I'm so in the coaching vein where I have no control over anything, and not really even when I was coaching did I had more input than I do now, but I was always trying to think like 2 steps ahead. Okay, we did this to score here. What are they going to respond with? And it's really hard for me to shut that off, even when it's not sports related. Going back to leukemia or being a foster parent, being a kid, I kind of learned to cope by, I don't expect much from people. And maybe some degree that can be healthy, but it also can be very cynical and unhelpful because I don't expect good things to happen, even though God has told me in Scripture, hey, all things work for the good of those that love the Lord. And I love the Lord, so I should expect things to work out, even if they blow up. And so sometimes I use that as an excuse to not trust people to do what they're supposed to do. And certainly don't build your house on people getting everything right. And so there's a balance to be had there. But I feel that.
Well, and you could probably bounce back to some of the things that we talked about in the last episode. So if you haven't heard it, you might ought to go back and listen to it. But the labeling idea of, this is who I am or this is what people are, usually that label comes based on some overgeneralized thought that I have about things. I'm a loser because all these times I've lost or I've messed up or I'm unwanted or I'm whatever. And some of those tie back into it. And so you'll find a lot of that with all 10 of these is that there's, cross patterns of where these things are connected to each other. And they just sort of send us into a spiral if we're not careful.
All right. So the next one is disqualifying the positive, which I probably just described pretty well about my own self. Discounting the good things that have happened or that you have done for some reason or another, as in that doesn't count.
Yeah, and this sort of goes back, I guess, a little bit to what we were saying last time about the mental filter is, somebody comes up and says, Will, you did a great job. And you're like, nope, I didn't, or even you don't say that out loud, but you walk away going, no, I missed this and this and this and this. I shouldn't have said this. And I got this, quote wrong, or I missed this many shots, like, man, you were on fire tonight. You hit 20 free throws. Well, I missed like 5 3-pointers. And so we disqualify anything that was good because of the bad things that we saw. And we have a tendency to do that. And maybe it may even happen when we look at other people's lives, that here's this great person and somebody's talking about it. And then automatically our mind goes, yeah, but they're, and it, fill in the blank for whatever it is.
I struggle. I think sometimes we value what some people say over what others, and I think you've already touched on that about, well, so-and-so said I did a good job, but they always tell me I do a good job, but so-and-so didn't, or I'm waiting for validation from this one person.
Yeah.
And maybe that is true. Like you should be being validated by a spouse or a parent or whoever, but not my self-worth is involved in this person saying I'm a good versus this person. I want to hear well done, thou good and faithful servant from God. And so be it with everybody else. That's easy to say, but not, easier said than done, I guess.
And it's probably why a lot of times in the, psychology world, they say it's good to, for every negative comment that you need to hear so many positive comments. I don't remember exactly what it is, like 1 to 5 or something like that. But it's also evident a lot of times in the scripture where Paul or Jesus in Revelation during the letters to the 7 churches, he would give them some negative feedback. He would say, here's things you need to be working on. But usually those letters would start off with, you're doing really great here. You're doing a great job with this, but here's some things you need to do. So, it's nice for us to hear the boths. So, to hear, both. We need criticism occasionally, but we really need to be able to hear and to accept the positive stuff too. It's good for us.
Yeah, the next one is magnification and minimization. And it's described as blowing things out of proportion or inappropriately shrinking something to make it seem less important.
You didn't want to have to say catastrophizing, did you?
I did not, because I was too fearful of what Travis would think of me if because all of my validation comes only from him.
From Travis. That's a scary place to be. So, yeah, with this one, I always think of a good way to describe it is looking through a binocular. So if you look through it one way, it blows everything up. If you look through it the other way, everything gets really small. And so a lot of times we have a tendency to magnify certain things. Sometimes we magnify our negatives. I think a lot of times we do that. And this is where we've talked about before with Facebook, where, I'm comparing what I know about my insides, about me, to what I see about of other people on Facebook or on their outside. I can't see their struggles. All I see is what they show me. And so sometimes we magnify our negatives because what we know about ourselves, and we minimize our positives. And then we do the reverse on others. A lot of times we magnify their positives and we minimize their negatives. And we may do it the other way around. It depends. But either way, we're not doing justice to what's really happening. And so instead of just seeing things for what they are, we inappropriately either catastrophize it, where we make it like this is the most horrible thing in the world and I'm terrible and whatever, or an event that happens, we blow it out of proportion. It's not, we tell people all the time, it's not the end of the world. Something bad's happened. It's not the end of the world. But a lot of times we do believe it's the end of the world. This is something that's horrible and we're never going to get through it. I mean, how many people were catastrophizing back at the end of football season this year? It's the end of Alabama football as we know it because Nick Saban is stepping away as the coach. Well, we may not win as many national championships as we did over the last several years, but those have been icing on the cake, man. Yeah. I mean, we lived through the bad days. I get it, but we have had something to celebrate for a long time. And so I was not ready to, the sky's falling and the world is coming to an end because we're no longer going to have Nick Saban. So,
yeah. And then you've got the flip side where people have flipped it and go, oh, it's over. Alabama will never win another football game ever. And it's like, it's probably somewhere in between.
Ideal versus unacceptable, kind of going back to the last.
There's some people like, if they just win less, I'll be happy,
But also, real quick, shout out to all the people thinking that the eclipse was catastrophic and the world was going to end because we're still here.
Yeah.
So
we are still here.
The next time we see an eclipse, hey, the Lord may not be coming back. So,
how many eclipses have been a part of predicting the Lord's return, and yet we're still here?
So just enjoy it.
Over. Using critical words like should, must, or ought can make us feel guilty or like we have already failed. If we apply shoulds to other people, the result is often frustration.
So this, I guess, would be the 9th one we've looked at over 2 episodes, and it's the idea of should. We a lot of times tell ourselves we should do this or should do that, or other people ought to do this or should do this. And there's some negative to that because when I start assigning that to myself and I didn't do it, number one, if I should have done something, that means it's already passed, right? I've got no control over that. So if I'm basically beating myself up over something I can't change. Now there might be a point where I say, I'd like to do this different next time. That's okay, because that's looking forward at what you can do and some choices you can make. But if I go, well, man, I should have, went to church this morning, or I should have said something positive to somebody, or I should have whatever, instead of it encouraging us to do the right thing, a lot of times it creates a lot of guilt and a lot of negativity. And then that guilt grows. And then sometimes we give up because, well, I didn't do it well that time. I'm not going to do it any others. And so we really create a mess if we're not careful of expectations that were not done, and I can't do anything about them now. And so we've talked about, I think on here before, the past. I can't fix the past. I can't go back there. I can't travel back there. It is what it is. And so letting the past go and choosing, okay, from here on out, I'm going to try to do better, but I can't really travel back there and change it. So why keep saying should or ought or whatever else? Because all that's going to do is create more negativity.
I think we've spoke to the idea. This can be like in our processing things. I should be at this level of grief in the grieving process, and you guys have certainly talked about. It's not necessarily steps; it's static. It's going back and forth. Grieving or getting over leukemia or some sickness or a loss. I should be at this stage. Everybody else is at this stage. And then the church thing, just to speak from somebody who goes to church, they'll be happy if you show up next time, right? Like there's going to be another service, Lord willing. And most people are just going to be happy that you're there at that one. Any church that's,
Well, and the same thing with like, when you said the other side of the coin, Will should have done this. If my thinking is Will should have whatever, then, and Will didn't, but I think he should have, then I'm going to be frustrated and I'm going to be angry. And that expectation, reality doesn't match up with that expectation. My wife should have, or my husband should have, or my kids should have. And if that's all I spend my time focusing on is what other people should have done or what I should have done, instead of, all right, how can we change it in the future? How can we move forward? Then I'm going to stay kind of in a negative place.
There's one thing, and Kayra, man, love her. We've talked about her, in the previous episode. She told me one time, she asked me to do something. And I said, well, and I think my word was, I really should do that, but I'm kind of torn because I've got a family thing. And so I was stuck and kind of in the present there. And she just looked at me and said, Will, no is a complete sentence and everything's going to be okay. And I've just loved that, because like in ministry, there's so many times, and Lindsay and I have tried to discuss this, and I need to listen more to, hey, you have a family here and you don't have to go support everybody else's family at the sacrifice of your own family, and just yourself. But I always come back with, but they need me and I need to be there. And she's going, there's a next time and it'll be okay. And so this one kind of hits home, but I love Karen's just, hey, no's a complete sentence and you don't have to justify that no because you said no, and that should be enough. And of course, not everybody is as kind and gracious as what Karen is, but the thought there is definitely for me to even consider when I ask other people, hey, no's a complete sentence for them too. And it should allow them that opportunity.
Hey, Karen, quit stepping on our toes through Will. I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's right. That's one of the best things that she's ever said to me. So here's our 10th one. It's called personalisation. Blaming yourself or taking responsibility for something that wasn't completely your fault. Conversely, blaming other people for something that was your fault.
Yeah, so the idea of sometimes we get, sucked into believing that, we apologize. I mean, just in general, we apologize for everything. You ever notice that? Like, I was actually somewhere the other day, and that was the point of conversation was, stop apologizing for everything. Everything's not your fault, but we do that a lot of times. I think, somebody says something and I'll say, I'm sorry. And then I'll think that really wasn't on my end to say, I'm sorry. I didn't really do anything. We just have that habit sometimes. And so, blaming myself for taking responsibility for something that really wasn't my fault. It might've been something that happened with the church, or it might've been something that happened at another place of work, or it might've been something that a family member did, but it's not yours, and sometimes we assign it to ourselves. Like, I should have fixed that. That happens a lot with death. We sometimes will blame ourselves, or blame someone else because we're looking for some relief, but it's not necessarily that we did it. We didn't cause those things. We're not the cause of it. We didn't create it. And so, we have to deal with how to cope with it, but everything's not your fault. and sometimes we look for, and whether it's me or look for someone else to pin it on, sometimes things just happen and they're not on us. So, that can very quickly cause us to feel negatively about ourselves and to spiral into a negative way of thinking, stinkin thinking.
There you go. Well, you've kind of touched on this a little bit all the way through these, but are there just some general tips? I mean, my first thought is in most of these, if you just try to logically, and I know that can be difficult for me, and reasonably, let your reasonableness be known, to reason through these things. And man, Whitney has gotten really good. If I mess up or hurt myself in some way, like stub my toe or do something really dumb, I'd be like, man, you're so stupid. And she's like, don't talk to yourself that way. You're not stupid. You're smart. And we kind of try to do the same for each other. But being where your feet are and realizing you do have limitations. And when talking about others, they do as well.
Yeah, I would say I've used this illustration some, and I don't know if she listens to this episode, but I don't want her to feel bad about it because it's been a great illustration for me for a long, long time. But Brandy May, you might remember, went to church with us, and once upon a time, I thought, she was probably, I guess, one of the only girls. I mean, there was a few girls in the youth group, but the ones our age, and as a teenage boy, you're looking to impress, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking when I get through preaching, because that's exactly why you're supposed to preach, right? To impress the people around you. Yeah. In my mind, I was thinking I'm going to impress someone with this. And I remember Brandy coming up to me afterwards and saying, you said like 35 times or something along that line. And so somewhat of a dagger to the heart that was what was picked up and that was what was heard, so we could apply that to some of these, I guess. But here's the thing. I started recognizing that I was saying that a lot when I was speaking, and whether I really recognized it in the moment, a lot of times what I would do is what I guess I found myself doing is as I would start to say it, I would recognize, or after I'd say it, I'd recognize it. Then it got a little bit more back into when I was saying it, I would recognize it. And then before I would say it, I would recognize it. So I bring that up to say that all these things that we've listed, and you can find these lists on Google, look up David Burns and cognitive distortions or whatever, and you're going to find them. And what I would say is that when your mind starts going there, that you recognize, okay, right now I'm feeling kind of all or nothing thinking coming on, but I know that that's not accurate. Like you're saying, kind of reason through it, but also recognize the feeling, recognize the thought, but then let it go. And hopefully what happens is, instead of it being, you've already done it, you start catching yourself before you do it. And eventually it'd be like that where you go, ooh, I don't want to do that. I'm going to catch myself before I do it. And I'm not going to let myself wander down that spiral.
Well, there's nothing like a teenage girl to keep the ego in check for teenage boys. So we appreciate it. Certainly the case. And preachers' wives, to be honest. I've had several preachers' wives let me know, not my wives, but they've let me know, hey, this needs to change. It's annoying, which I appreciate now. But appreciate it, Ben. Appreciate it, Will. Great stuff. Good information. Go check out episode 1. And we'll talk at you again soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.